Greetings, good evening, and welcome again to Creative Thoughts Media. We are speaking with a brother that I have seen over many years in an organization called the Asar Set Society. His name is Brother Nafaunkh Un Nefe.
Correct. Yes.
Welcome, brother, and good
Thank you
evening.
very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
Brother, can you give me the story of how you started or what triggered you to start off on the journey of spirituality when you become a writer? What started off that journey?
Well, the writing part wasn't part of it. I mean, that came about. I'll tell you what actually happened. So I grew up in the Caribbean, in Dominica to be precise, which is where I am now. I live in Dominica now. And whilst I was in the Caribbean, growing up there, around about the age of about maybe about 20, about that time, because I was born in the UK. My parents took me to the Caribbean when I was very small, and then round about 87, I came back to the UK. But prior to that, I got myself involved in initially in Rastafari for a while. I was following what they were talking about. I was into going to the reggae music and things of that nature, the protest music. I understood by that time I got into that in maybe late teens. I understood that our history had been falsified by a certain group of people. So we kind of got into it, and that kind of understanding. So I was following that for a little while. I didn't get fully into Rastafari, but at the time, when I realized that Christianity, Islam, and so on was not of our origin, it wasn't something of my culture and history, but Rasta at the time was the only one that seemed to be having some kind of an impact on me in terms of protesting the system, as it were, right? So at the minute in the Caribbean, Rastafarianism was what I was about. And then in about 1985, I must have been about 23, 24, something like that. I remember Dr. Sabi, the renowned herbalist, came to our island to do a talk. So I went to listen to the talk, and during the talk, he talked about honoring your mother and your father. I remember that very clearly, but he wasn't talking about like my immediate mother and father. He was talking historically. So I'm listening to him and I'm thinking, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. So what I did was that I started, listen to him some more, and he was actually talking about being what they call vegetarian, but at the time we come to know as being a vegan. Now, being a vegan at the time within Rastafari meant what we understood the term ital vital. If I go anywhere now in where I am here now, and I say, "Oh, can I get a vegan plate to eat?" Most people won't know what I'm talking about. If I say ital vital, then everybody will know what I'm talking about, right? So although they're talking plant-based now, which is typical of Europeans, they take what we take and they put some fancy term to it. But at the time, it was ital vital. You see. So I began to see talking about not eating meat and things of that nature, and we're not supposed to eat meat. So I thought, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. So I live in the Caribbean now, and I was into farming a little bit, vegetables and stuff like root fruits and stuff like that. So after that, I decided to. Now remember, today, if you imagine me today, I was eating everything. I was eating, dairy, all kinds of dairy, everything. So after the lecture, I thought to myself, let me give it a try. So I went home and I cut out all dairy food straight away. No looking back. I cut everything out. And through that process, somehow, it helped to clean out the body. Then, for some reason or the other, it had an impact on me mentally to the point where I began to ask a lot of other questions about, about life and African history and things of that nature. So what I did was that I went to, at that point in 87, I returned to the UK. And on returning to the UK, I got involved with a youth center called the Yar Santo Art Center. I spent time there. I had a friend there who invited me over. I knew him in Dominica. He was one of the managing directors there, and he asked me to come and see him because And whilst I was there was Rastamen there who were doing who were there. We used to reason a lot of reasoning going on, a lot of reasoning, and so that's where the journey started, taking me into Pan-Africanism. Because at the time I was in the Caribbean, when I was there, I didn't know the term Pan-Africanism at the time. But one of the things I was always into when I was going to school here, I was always into history and understanding history. I was pretty good at history. And at the time in the Caribbean, when you were at school, you were taught about the slave trade. That was the standard thing within schools here. You learn about the slave trade. We had a book called Slavery of the West Indies and stuff like that, which was used to as part of our GCSE, our GC, well, GC at the time. Because when we did exams in Dominica, we did the UK GCE exams, so we were tested on those sorts of things. You see, so slavery was part and parcel of the curriculum. I don't know if it's changed that much today, and I still understand today that is still a focus of history. But when I went to the UK, I began to expand my understanding of history, culture, and things of that nature. I hadn't yet got into spirituality yet. That was something that came later on. I was more focused around reasoning, around different things. And when I began to look at history, and I understood that prior to the popular religions that are out there now, we had an historical impact long before Christianity, Islam, Judaism, long before Buddhism, long before those practices were forced upon us. We lived a long time. We were around long before that. So my question was always, well, if we were there before that, what were we doing? What religious practice did we have? So that's how the process started.
Okay. Oh, sorry, hold on. And then and so like say, sorry, let me just add you on again. There's a little glitch. Yeah, hold on. Oh boy. Okay. Hold on. Yes, hold. Yes.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, so very interesting story because at the time Rastafarianism was the only avenue we had to give
That's
us
right.
some kind of foundation where we could have stand for something. Because
yes, West Indies cricket.
Yes, and the cricket, because after the Gavi movement, then the Rastas took over, and then we had something just to anchor us a bit in order for us to start the journey.
That's right.
Okay, so yes, so from that time, so what did you move on to after veganism, or what you call um
Vital in the Caribbean.
Vital in the Caribbean? So what happened from there? What did you move to other organizations? Did you expand your scope? Did you enter into spirituality? What happened from from that point onward?
Right. So what happened was, so when I came back here, came back to England around about 1987. I spent a lot of time researching, just studying, meeting people who knew a lot more than me, learning from people, a lot more than me, going to events and so on. I remember in my early days, there's a bookshop in that used to be in Ladbroke Grove called I think it was Frontline. It was Frontline Bookshop, if I remember correctly. I remember one of the first history books that I bought. In fact, before I came to the Caribbean, there was a bookshop in Dominica, in Rose and Dominica, called Frontline. And I went in there, and the first book I remember buying was Catch a Fire, which was a biography of Bob Marley. I remember that. I was reading that book, and because I was into Rastafari, so I was reading that book a little bit. And then when I got to the UK, I then went to a Frontline store, and the first book I bought was a book by Sheikh Anta Diop called History of African Civilization, something of that nature. I don't remember the exact title right now. And I remember getting that book and reading that book for a while. And then I began to delve deeper and deeper to find out that a lot of our history had been falsified, which I knew from before. But the resources, because internet wasn't in those days, it wasn't like it is now. So when I was in Dominica, I didn't have access to a lot of stuff. But by coming here by coming to the UK, it was like having a camera lens in the Dominica. We had a small camera lens, and then when I hit the UK, I had a wide angle lens, so I could see a lot more. I was able to research a lot more and find out a lot more, speak to a lot of different people who knew way more than I did, giving me advice, get this book, get that book. So I began to get heavily into buying books, history books in particular, right? Okay. So I could study what I was studying. I got a fairly large library of books here, which I'm going through. So I began to collect books, go to events and things of that nature. And then, but what became key was in the Pan-African, and obviously I got into the Pan-African movement. That's when I got back in 87.
Can you explain to the audience what this Pan-African means? Because some might not know. Can you explain to us what this Pan-African means, please?
Well, there's probably not one specific definition, but my definition of it really is getting into a movement that pushes and promotes an African identity, an African cultural identity, regardless of whether you think you're Jamaican, Barbadian, Dominican, whatever the case may be. You're pushing an identity that you identify as an African, or you identify yourself as Black, to use the term, right? And you have a historical reference to all of that. So we looked at people like George, the fathers of Pan-Africanism, really, Marcus Garvey, George Padmore, people of that nature, right? So it's really a movement that seeks to position us as a people with our own culture, our own identity, going back and pulling back the historical references that were scrubbed off by Europeans in favor of their history, to make us look like we don't know what we had nothing to do with anything, right? So when I started getting into that now, and in England at the time, there was a lot of different things taking place. You had lectures, you had scholars coming over from the US doing lectures. You had local people doing lectures. You go to events that were, if I can use the term, pro-Black events, because those events were designed to put back pride and identity within people. But up to a certain point, if all we hear about is that we were slaves, even if that term is questionable, the whole practice of, I don't personally subscribe to the term slave trade. I think something happened, but it wasn't a slave trade, as it were. So I began to really immerse myself in that, the history, the culture, and it helped inform my practices as well, because I became a youth worker very early on. And in becoming a youth worker, I then infused a lot of that within the work that I did, you see. And so as my journey took place, and I met people and got involved in organizations, not a lot of organizations, I was very selective at the time, but go to a lot of events. at some point within the process, I became a member of a Saracen Society International, because what we were looking for, what was really key, what I was looking for to understand, what were we doing prior to Christianity? And Christianity is about 6,000 years old, for example.
Very young.
I know we lived a lot longer than 6,000 years. Islam as a religion is about 1,500 years old. It's relatively young as a religion. So my question then became, well, if that's the case, then what were we doing before that came along? We know we had the pyramids. We know we had those things. And there's no way an unintelligent people could have built the pyramid. There's no way. And there's no way it could have been done without some sort of spiritual reference, some kind of religion, some kind of understanding of your relationship to the divine. There had to be that in it. But what was it? What was it? And that's when I went, because my thing is, if we lived before the Christianity and Islam and so on came in, then there's got to be something there that tells us that. What is it? And so then you get into the history books of Sheikh Anta Diop, Professor John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben, and so on. When you start reading their material, then you began to feel, oh, hang on a minute. Now we're getting down to the root of what this is about. Now we're finding the information that we need. So I'm out there voraciously buying books, buying this book, buying that, literally running myself broke, just buying books, and getting all of this information, right? And so that is what I began to do, and make sure that I understood what I was doing, because our history is so vast. Even with the recent coloring books I've done, it is so huge. We had literally mapped the globe and gone all over the place before anybody else turned up on the scene, right? But come to that later. So that is how I fueled my passion for the subject. So when I was living in Dominica, I always had an interest in history. But now when I began to find out, Khemit, ancient Egypt, Indus Kush, which is Black India, right? When you find out that the original Chinese, even they tell you this, their professors tell you, they don't all tell you, but their professors tell you that the original Chinese was black, the original Japanese was black. Then you began to think, oh, wait a minute here, what is going on here? And then you began to research it. And then I used to spend a lot of time at the British Library. That's another place I used to go. I used to go to the British Library. And when I was at the British Library, I used to go there. But British Library at those days, once you got the pass, it's very expensive to get stuff out of there. They charge a lot for photocopying. In those days, it was photocopying in those days, right? And they charge you a lot just for one sheet of photocopying. But I spent a lot of time in the British Library pulling out all these ancient books I was finding and finding information. The original Scots were black, and so on and so on, right? The Celts, the original black Celts were black. This stuff you don't learn. This is stuff they don't tell you, right? They hide all of that stuff from you. I had to go digging around and finding stuff. I could tell you some stories about me going into the German embassy to find stuff. Stories about me going into the Italian embassy, right, to find particular pieces of material to support what it is that we're talking about. So it was a journey fueled by a desire to learn, but also a desire to, as we say, the reason for our struggle is our children. And I had to arm myself with enough of that because I worked with children. I was a youth worker for 34 years. Right, and at the time, so that's how I got into all of it.
Now, is there any particular person that helped influence you in your quest? And the next question is when you was in Dominica, what was the response of your peers or your friends in Dominica when you had discussions? What was it like in Dominica? That's the first question. When you was talking to your friends about your study, because you had an interest in the African history. So what was your friend's response when you talked to them?
Well, now that I've come back, it's kind of interesting because people, Dominica's a great place, lovely place. In fact, the Caribbean is a nice region to be, right? And then what you have here, you have some people who are very much aware of history and of culture. We have others who are not aware of it. We have some people, people I've met who you mentioned with Pan-African, they say, what is it? We don't know what that is. We have no idea what that is. You see, I'm wearing this shiki now, right? If I walk down the road, I went somewhere the other day and somebody said, oh, African, Mr. Nigerian, how you doing? So they assume that's where I'm from because I'm wearing a dashiki. They assume that's where I'm from because I'm wearing a dashiki, you see? And I pretty much wear these all the time. These become staple parts of my wear, what I do, as part of my movement into Pan-Africanism. Because obviously my name wasn't originally Nafaunkh Un Nefe. That came much later on.
Yes,
that wasn't my original name. So when I got into the Pan-African music, when you go to events, you're wearing you got to wear your clothes. You can't wear a three-piece suit.
You have to represent.
You have to represent. You
yes.
see, so a lot of them today, and I haven't been back to Dominica that long, so I'm still getting around. But there are movements here. There's a reparations committee and things of that nature. So people do meet me, and a lot of them have an understanding of it. Some of them don't have an understanding of it. And so when you're reasoning with people, they're like, wow, we'd like to know more and things of that nature. Yeah, people do ask. People do ask. They want to know more. They want to understand a bit more about what's going on. Like one young person, young lady said, she phrased it this way: please, I want you to teach me the wisdom. Teach me the wisdom. People don't, there's not a lot of that here, right? There's more now than it used to be years ago. But there's still like a vacuum to be filled in terms of people's understanding and what you can give to them. Yes.
And who has been most influential in your journey in the UK, or who was the most influential person?
There's not one person. There's not one person. When I see the work of our historian, John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben, and the stuff that they did out there, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, when I see the things that they're doing, so it's not necessarily just one person. It's a combination of things and a lot of people that I met along the line, met along the way. There are, and also situations, like I'm heavily focused around ensuring children know that history. And that fuels me a lot because there's people out there who are hell-bent on erasing our history. Even today, there's people that write lies about us, even today in their books. But what I said to my friend, I was speaking to a friend of mine recently, I said, listen, the key thing is not to concern yourself about what he is saying about our history. The Cubans weren't black, they weren't this, we didn't do that. No, the key thing is to arm our children with that knowledge. When we're gone, we need to go with people that's going to take it over.
Yes.
And know who they are.
Yes.
Right? We can't let when we're gone, and that's the end of it. There has to be another step. So we have to arm our children with that information so that they can then take the work that we did. Sheikh Anta Diop, huge influence. In fact, he was the second book that I bought when I came here, and I went to the bookshop. It was the second book I bought. Right, Civilization or Barbarism.
Yes,
I bought that book. I remember I bought that book. And I was reading that for a little while. I didn't understand all of it, but I had to get used to some of the technical terms and things of that nature. So in terms of influence, it was a combination of things. It wasn't just people, it was situations. It was watching the fact that the Carib, when I look at, my mom was an influence, right? She did not get, put it this way, I would say, due to the racism and so on, your parents got denied access to certain things. They had skills, but they got denied access to a lot of stuff, right? She didn't get to be what she wanted to be. She was here for a while in the UK, didn't get to be what she wanted to be. So therefore, that influenced me to ensure that I can do better and my children can benefit. You see, because I saw because I look at things like the economics of the world. There's more than enough land space for everybody to eat. Nobody should be starving. More than
100%.
enough. But
100%.
you got a situation where 15% of the world is eating 85% of the world's resources. So 85% of the people of the world are trying to survive on 15% of the world's resources. Why is that necessary? But everywhere, where, and we know that 15% who they are is Europe, America, those places there. They're eating all the world's resources. So the rest of the world has very little to survive on. And usually, it's usually the non-white peoples of this world who are that huge 85% that have very little to survive on. You see? So, and then, politics comes into it. I'm not hugely political, but I do understand what's going on. You see? So those are the things that fuel my continued push towards, in terms of what I do, especially to ensure that our children understand who they are and so on. That's really major for me.
Now, growing up in that environment, I mean, was did you face like any situation where you like a troubled child? Did that make you be a bit troubled? And what so did you felt challenged? And that was the one that really, and that gave you some grounding, because some people can come from being very challenged, facing all sorts of situations, and certain things swell them. Did you ever have those experiences growing up
Even in the Caribbean?
in the UK?
In the UK? Yeah, well, I didn't spend most of my time in the UK, actually. I spent most of my time in the Caribbean. I was spared, due to my parents' decisions, I was spared some of the things that took place here. When I went to the Caribbean, when they took me to the Caribbean, I was 9 years old. And when I came back to the UK, I was 25, if I remember correctly. So most of my time I grew up in the Caribbean.
Okay.
So I avoided a lot of the kind of issues that you would find that Black people here at that age, from young growing up, experience. So I avoided most of them. I didn't grow up here in the UK, so I didn't get into that sort of issue with trouble and school and things of that nature. I was in the Caribbean, and obviously in the Caribbean, economically it was not easy either, right? And that fueled me because I understood very clearly that the powers that be were bleeding these countries dry. And when they got independence, so-called independence, they were just left after having gone through slavery and all that kind of stuff. They left. And we're still feeling it today. Even I'm back here now, and we're still feeling that today.
Yeah, and then so what was it? So what was it like growing up in the Caribbean, living in the West, the UK, 9 years, knowing where you came from, and thinking the West is a better place to grow up? Did you ever felt, wow, why am I bring? Did you ever felt like, why I should be in the UK but I'm in Dominica? Did you ever felt that way?
Let me tell you. I remember that. I remember that as if it was yesterday.
Cool.
Now, when you, it's kind of I'll never forget this. I was 9 years old. I remember being woken up out of my bed. Get up. Change it. Put your clothes on. I remember that very, very clearly. Now you have to remember, children at that age are not party to parental discussion.
Not at all.
Right? You simply do what you're told.
100%.
So 1 minute, I'm looking at these nice, smooth roads. We're driving over here in the UK and TV, all that kind of stuff there. Next minute, I'm in Dominica, and I'm looking out the window and thinking, oh my goodness, what is this? Where am I? How did I end up here? It's the first time I had heard a cock crow live. I heard no cock crow live. First time. I heard it on TV a lot, but I never actually realized it. Sorry, first time I'd seen pigs, right? Walking up what they were doing. I'd never seen anybody walk barefoot with no shoes on. First time. Because in England we didn't do that. We had shoes on our feet. We didn't do that. So I remember my first reaction.
So you're civilized. So you're civilized in England.
It appeared in at 9 years old, my young mind, it appeared as if they're taking me to some place backward, which I never knew about, right? I left McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? And I saw people, killing goats and so on to eat and stuff like that. I was like, wow, is that how it's done? Is that what they do, right? Not just by the road. Obviously, they cultivated, grow the chickens or whatever, and so on and so on. So when I remember when I arrived, when I was taken here, I should say, and I arrived here, I was like, I looked at we arrived at night. I remember we landed close to the evening, and as we're driving, I'm looking around me and I'm thinking, what is this place? Never forget it. I'm like, wow. But I was so tired. I fell asleep on 9 years old. I fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up. Now, why did I wake up? I woke up because I heard a cock crow, like it was an alarm. Wake me up. I was like, wow, what is that noise? And I'm like, what is that? And I looked outside and I saw the cock walking the street. I'm thinking, oh my God, what is that? So those are my early reflections. And I looked at my parents and I said, can we go back to England, please? And the response was very clear. You want to go back to England? You have to make your way back at the right time when it's appropriate for you. You're staying here for now. I was gutted. I'll never forget it. I was absolutely gutted. But I got used to it. It was a completely different place. I got used to it. We made friends and so on. We got used to it. And through that, and when you ask me what fueled my move into Pan-Africanism and so on, is those type of experiences. Because when I now realize what we were historically to what we are now in the Caribbean, or I should say at the time in the Caribbean and so on, when I realize the discrepancy between us being kings and queens to what they made us believe in their history books, what we are, I began to think, hold on a minute, these people have been lying to us all this time. And so those are the experiences I talked about that helped fuel my movement into Pan-Africanism, studying history, running my youth centers and teaching, because I realized everybody needs to know, all of our children needs to know what it is that we were about, because it's hidden from us in the history book, lies like you could believe, and we have to be the ones to correct all of that, you see. But that's what it's like. I mean, in my early days here, as I'm growing, I'm getting used to being in Dominica. We go to shops. I remember those days when we went to shops. You had to buy butter. In those days, they would scoop it out of a container, weigh it on these 2-week scales with the weights in a piece of paper, and that's how we had to have it back in those days. In England, we had to go to the supermarket. You buy it in nice tins and jars, and so on. So everything was very, 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 very different. I had to get used to quite a lot, but I was hardy, I was hardy, and I got in there. When I realized, well, there's no ticket for me to go back straight away, right? I had to make my own way at some point in the future. I had to make my own way. I just got down with it, and I tell you, now I think about it, I remember it very fondly, because I often think, had my parents not taken me to the Caribbean, had they left me in England, and having done youth work for 34 years in the UK, I often wonder what I would have been like had I stayed here, because it was two completely different. Even when it came down to eating food, I remember very clearly. I remember very, very clearly, well, like yesterday. In the Caribbean, we eat yam, dasheen, banana, and stuff like that, right? I remember the neighbors one day, because the neighbors used to look after us quite a bit, and I remember one day they served me this dish of food, and I said, and that, meat, chicken, and rice, and dasheen, yam, banana, and I remember putting aside the dasheen. I didn't like it, didn't want it, and the banana, I didn't want it. So the woman who served me, she said, "You're gonna eat that?" I said, "No, I don't like that." She said, "Really?" So he took the plate from me. He said, "No problem." Took the plate from me, went to the kitchen, and then she brought the plate back. And you know what she did? She took off the chicken, the rice, and everything else off the plate, and she left me the dasheen, the yam, and the banana. She said to me, If you don't eat that, you will starve. I was in shock because I come from England. What am I used to? I'm used to eating, you know what I mean? It wasn't so much dashing and yam, but if I said I didn't like something, then that was it. He said to me, you will starve if you don't eat that food. Who tell you from that day on, I'm the most avid supporter of yam, dashing, banana. I love it. That was my lesson. And over there, they teach you, you get to learn these lessons because there's no other way around it. People over there, things are tough. You don't waste people's food. You don't, mess up. You don't waste food. You don't mess around over there. There's a way of functioning in the Caribbean which is unlike anywhere. But I'm grateful for it. I'm absolutely grateful for it. Wonderful. Now that I think about it, at the time it wasn't, but now I know.
Yeah.
It was.
Now, when you and now when you return to the UK at 24, you say
about 24, 25.
25. What from arriving in the UK? What happened? I mean, the experience you had in the Caribbean, how you were to integrate back into the society, into the British system, to find your way to become a worker, a key worker, a worker with
Youth
young
worker,
people.
youth worker.
Sorry, yes, a youth worker. How you became a youth worker when you arrive in the UK, when you integrate into the system?
Well, when I came back, like I said, a friend of mine from Dominica. He used to manage a youth center called the Yar Santo Art Center. So I had to go there first and foremost. I spent a lot of time there. I remember doing that art exhibition because I'm an artist as well. I'm an artist. I'm a designer. So I used to have art exhibitions there and things of that nature, right? I think the biggest thing about integrating more was that in 1985 is when I became a vegan. So in coming back to the UK, I was like, how am I going to eat? What am I going to eat? But obviously, in the UK, there's quite a range of choices for people who are eating into that lifestyle. So and a lot of people I met also were also vegan, by the way. They're also vegan, so we were able to, they taught me stuff, and I learned stuff from them, right? And then in the process of, use the term reintegration as it were, it wasn't that difficult. Once I learned places I go to, I met certain friends I hooked up with. I just maneuvered and did the things I needed to do in order to, because I lived obviously I wasn't with my parents anymore. So when I came back here, I had to live with friends. People I just met, I had to live with friends, right? I remember when I first came back, I lived in Acton in the UK for a while. I was in a flat in Acton, near Acton Tube Station, and I used to go to the high street quite a bit just to check out the high street. In many ways, it was good to be back because there were a lot more options for me. There were a lot more options to be able to feed myself and so on and so on. And then at Yar Santo is when I first started getting into youth work. I had a friend of mine called Tana Carter, who I got into youth work with him. And that's where I started the process. And because the Yar Santo was a project that focused on Black culture, African culture, and history, then I was able to start honing my skills in that area. I started to, as I was studying my history and culture and stuff like that, we got to infuse that in the process. There's a lot of events going on over there, so I began to go to a number of different events around London just to spend time with people and around people who I could learn from, understand things from. So that's when I started to really get myself more into the Pan-African movement. There was Marcus Garvey days, Marcus Garvey days that certain people used to put on events around Black history, Black culture was always on there. And a lot of that took place in Lambeth. Lambeth was where I spent the majority of my time working as a youth worker for about 30 plus years, but I'd worked in different youth centers across London, I set up quite a number of different youth centers and so on in and around London. So in doing that work, I took the knowledge of what I learned from in Dominica, what I learned in studying history, and I started to infuse a lot of that in what I do. And the thing about doing youth work at the time, although when I came, I studied graphic design, I qualified as a graphic designer, spent about 3 years at the London, it was called the London College of Printing at the time, which was in Clerkenwell in South London. I qualified as a designer because that's what I did. I was an artist, you see. But what I got into was when I began to work with young people, I began to see, oh, there's a way to help to shape young people to, to get them into that, the history, the culture and stuff like that. And in those days, it was very much something that was needed. It was really needed at the time because, again, when I talked about having grown up in the Caribbean, having avoided a lot of the stuff that took place here, when I got here, I realized, oh my goodness, the sort of things that young people here were exposed to, right? The street crime and the drugs and all those sorts of things. And I began to think, oh my goodness, this is why I avoided my being in the Caribbean. But now that I got back, I was able to use my skill and my understanding of history, culture, that sort of thing, in order to help to infuse and to energize young people. There were so many events taking place. And in those days, there was a lot of finance available to, not like now where they shut stuff down, but there was a lot of, you get a lot of finance to run projects, you see. And there was a lot of movements, a lot of things happening with Black people. I remember things like the New Cross fire, 13 dead, nothing said. I remember things like when Joy Gardner was I think was being deported by the police at some point and died in police custody. So a lot of those things that was taking place, and Black people were on the receiving end of a lot of stuff. You see, where the Brixton riots. Although I wasn't there during the Brixton riots, I was still in. If I remember, I was still in the Dominica, but I'd heard about the Brixton riots and things of that nature. You see, so those things helped to shape me. So when I became a youth worker, it wasn't so much about harping on about those things, but it was about teaching young people. Listen, we have a history, we have a culture. If we infuse that within what they're doing, let them learn about that. So let them learn, let them help to reclaim their history. If you don't learn to reclaim your history, somebody else is going to write it for you, right? And we can't allow somebody else to write our story. Like they say in Africa, until the gazelle has got its own historians, all history will favor the lion, because the lion what took out everyone. The lion was always victorious. You see, so until the gazelle had its own history, everything would favor the lion. So we had to, because history tells us what we did, what we were about, and where we should be going. So I use that as a way of running my project. I infuse all of that in my projects. When I ran, in about 1990, there was a project in Brixton called a New Initiative Youth Centre, right? It was a project that focused specifically with Black young children. A lovely project. The people that ran it, very nice people. And I started off there I was there for a while as a part-time worker. And then, as they do within the local government, stuff like that, they decided to do a restructuring. So they tried to shut the project down. They moved the 2 people out, and it just so happened they didn't do their homework. They put me in charge. Well, what happened there? Right? Because they wanted to try and snuff out that type of work with Black young children, but they didn't know what I was about. So as it would have it, they put me in charge, and I carried on the same thing, right? A project specifically working with Black young children. And what I realized when I first started the project, one of the things I noticed is that our children respond artistically to a lot of stuff. That doesn't mean academically they're not good. They're great academically. But I began to realize that when there were projects going on in and around London, right? When there were dance competition, this competition.
Oh yeah, we did ask you what kind of projects. Yes, yes.
Yeah. We used to have, there were dance competitions, theater competitions, music competitions. Black children were always, they were always on those things. So when I started the project, I began to think, how am I going to start this project? And then somebody said to me, start a dance class. So in 1990, not 1994, when I started the Pyramid Youth Development Project. I started with a dance class. And then suddenly these black girls from nowhere, they all started coming to the project. And they started to, we dance. And then as they were doing that work, I added more stuff. I added a film program. I had a dance class, I added a film program. I added theater program. And I added a photography program and so on, right? And because I realized that just to sit down and teach our children history from a book was never going to work, right? Because they wouldn't listen to it just like that. So what I did, I took the arts and I said, this is how I'm going to do this. So I took the arts, set up all of these arts programs within the project, but then I infused history in between it so they wouldn't know the difference. And that is how I managed to get to infuse our history and culture within the arts, within our young people. Today, right now, most of those young people are not only are they all doing very well, they'll call me and say, Kitwana, thank you. Because at the time, I think my name was Kitwana, right? My name was Kitwana. They say, Kitwana, thank you very much for what you did before. At the time, we did not appreciate what you were doing, but now we can truly say we are African. We got it now. But when I first came back, something that I need to say. When I first came back here, I had an English, French, I had a Scottish, English, and French name. But I'm not Scottish, English, or French. So I'm thinking, how can I have a Scottish, English, or French name? So I wouldn't say what it was. I wouldn't say what they were. So in the end, what I did was, and the thing is, when I was associating with Rastaman or people who are Black conscious movement and stuff like that, and they said their name, they had all these African names, right? They had all these African names. And they're here walking around with a Scottish, English, and French name. And they're looking at me like, okay, you got a dashiki on, but what's that name you got there? You got to do something about that name. You got to do something about that name. Those names, you got to do something about it. So one day I found this African names book, open up the book, and then the first page, I opened it up, the letters, all the alphabetical order in the book. K came up, and I looked at the K, and the first name I saw was Kitwana. And that meant it was a house name for Southern Africa, which meant pledge to live. So I decided from that day on, everybody calls me, I'm going to be called Kitwana, right? So that was a name I used. And even right now to this day, most people call me that name. That's how everybody knows me. So it's not a name everybody uses. But at the time it meant pledge to live. I thought, well, that sounds all right. I'll use that as my name. So anytime I went to these places now, and I'm dressed in my African gear, whatever, my gowns, I at least had a name to go with it now. So I no longer use the English, Scottish, and the French. I didn't use that anymore. I was out the window. And plus, I remember my mum telling me it was a Scottish nurse who named me after she gave birth. I said, but mum, you let a Scottish nurse name me? A Scottish nurse? And I will say this, the surname was Blanc. But what does Blanc mean in English? French. What does it mean in English? It means white.
White, yeah.
It means white. So everybody's troubling me, thinking, you can get a black man with a surname that means white. What's that about? So it just had to go. It just had to go. So I got rid of it. Right, I got rid of that name, and not legally yet. That was just people say nickname. It was just an African name I had using. It wasn't legally my name yet. Until years ago, I changed it legally. You see. So when I ran this project, everybody knew me as Kitwana, right? And what we did, most youth projects would have table tennis, pool, and table tennis and pool. One other table tennis, pool table, and there's one other game. I don't remember what it was now. And I said, when the manager would ask me, do I want a pool table? Do I want a table tennis table? I said, no, I don't want any of those things. Say, why not? Because 99% of those children I'm working with are not going to be professional table tennis players. They're not going to be professional pool players. So what do I want it for? I'm teaching them stuff that can help them understand who they are, educate them, uplift them, pool and table tennis. Oh, and bar football. That's the other one, bar football. Right, that little thing you play, that bar football. I said, I don't any of those things. So I ran the project for about 10, 11 years with none of that in it, right? It was history, it was art stuff, you know, the film, photography, theater, dance, music studios. So I said, all of these things, and in those days, the council will give you money for these things. I made sure I ordered everything I needed. I brought in professionals to work with these young children. That's another thing I did. I didn't hire youth workers. Although it was a youth center, most people had youth workers. No, what I did, I had professionals to run all of those things, right? Because I said to myself, if I'm going to get these young children forward, right, I need to have the best people to do the job. The best people wasn't always a youth worker. Unless that youth worker is trained in a very specific thing. No, I wanted a filmmaker. So I brought in filmmakers to run my film program. Photographers, proper photographers, trained photographers to run my photography program. Trained people in theater to run the theater program. And it worked so well. A lot of those young people now went into all of those professions and they're doing very well. But in addition to that now was the history and the culture. Whenever we put on events, that was always a part of the process. Because without that, what would I be doing? You see? And if we don't do our own history, somebody else is going to control us and teach us their history. And we know we know how that story ended. Right? So I said, no more of that. Let's focus on what we are about. And it ran for a good 10, 11 years. And then one day they shut it down. You see, they unfortunately, when Lambeth changed their management teams and so on, unfortunately, they brought in two black managers and they are the ones that shut me down. Because when I was running the project with the European managers and so on, they left me alone. They didn't trouble me. They gave me money. Listen, I even took children to Ghana for a trip. I said, you know what? I taught you all guys enough history from the book. I'm going to take you somewhere to see the history now. And I did trips to Ghana.
Wow.
With those young, and Lambeth funded it.
Wow.
Unfortunately,
well done,
yeah, I did trips to Ghana. I had hookups with children in Holland. The project was so well known. One of our managers went to Iceland one day. He said, Kitwana, you wouldn't believe it. People know about your project in Iceland. Right? So people in Iceland, Holland, they knew about the project. So, and then one day they changed management. See, these two black managers came in and so on. And they were the ones that shut me down, shut the project down. Would you believe it?
Strategically.
They shut it down. But I said, you know what? But my motto was, you've closed the barn doors after the horse is already bolted.
Okay.
So what happened?
Yes, sorry.
Well, basically, they came in. The managers came in. I won't name their names, but they came in, and they didn't like the fact that it was a black-only project. They wanted everybody to be able to come, and I said no.
Inclusivity.
Yeah, they wanted that, but the project I ran was legal under the law. Everybody knew there was a section of the Race Relations Act that allowed you to run a project to target a specific group. They didn't like it, and in the end, they decided to close it down and want something more inclusive. But I said to them, like when I said to the young people, listen, don't worry about it. Remember what I taught you. Remember what this project was about. I said I could have run this project from a telephone box. It is not the building that's the issue. That's just bricks and mortar. It's what you took in from the process that's very important. And now let's speak to those young people now who are now adults. Some of them are married, have children, and so on. They always remember it, and they said, "Thank you very much for that." Because at the time we didn't appreciate what you're doing, but now we can see the value of what you're doing. You see, and what really kicked that off? I tell you what's interesting about that. I was talking to my son the other day, my son, and he was playing this music. I said, "Hold on a minute, that you playing this conscious reggae music? That music was before you born." You know, he said to me, when he was very small, maybe about 5, 6. He said, when I was driving around in his car seat or whatever what they were, he said to me, I used to be playing that music in the car. I said, you remember that from that day on? He said to me, yes. You thought we weren't listening. Wow. We were taking it in. So now I realize the impact of getting our young children early, which is henceforth why I got into becoming an author and writing and doing my books. Get it early. That's what came up in that. Yeah.
Yeah. So 2 things I want to ask you before you move on to your book. When they shut down the project, what you did after in order for you to continue that mission? What happened from that?
Oh, well, that was a very interesting story. 'Cause what happened was when they shut me down, I was in the project was in Willington Road in Clapham North. It's called
Hmm.
Willington Road. It's not, I think it's now called Willington Road Youth Centre or something like that. It's probably called that now. When they shut it down, they moved me to another site.
Hmm.
As soon as they moved me to that site, I simply once I landed, I looked around the place. I said, okay, no problem. And I simply set up the project again. I continued what I was doing. They were like, oh my gosh, he's done it again. I thought we moved him out of that pyramid place. He's done it again. So I set up the project in another building, ran that for another year or two. And eventually they then moved me from there. Because one of the things I was very good at in youth work, apart from doing that, I was very good at getting projects started from the ground up. You give me an empty building and I can run a youth work project from it quite easily. I was very good at starting off projects. And so because they realized that, they then sent me to there were projects that they had that weren't functioning very well. They weren't working. So they sent me to other projects to get projects started. You see? And they trusted me to get it started. And that's what I did. And then until one day I decided, you know, it was time for me to move on to move on from what I was doing into something else. But yeah, that's what I started to do. And that's when and the other thing I used to do a lot of was that at my projects, I would get hardware to enable me to carry out the work that I did. So when they moved me to this new project, one of the things I did was that I walked into the building and I saw there were people there using the building, and I looked at part of it and I said, you know what, I could put a music studio here, because music is a very good avenue for teaching young people history, very good
Hmm.
avenue. And so when I walked in, I said to them, I want to put a music studio in here. They looked at me and said to me, you what? I said, I want to put a music studio in this room, a state-of-the-art music studio. They said, no, you can't be serious. I said, yeah. So I went to Lambeth, told them what I wanted to do. They looked at me and they said, okay, is that what you want to do? Here's the money. And I brought in a professional company to put a state-of-the-art music studio. It's still there now. There's a place called Knights Hill.
Wow.
The old library Knights Hill. If
Mm.
you go to the old library Knights Hill in Norwood, West Norwood, the music studio is still in there. I put that in there. Nobody would know that because my name's not on it. But I was the one that put that music studio in there. And they put a state-of-the-art music studio. And I started to continue that work again, pumping out these musics, working with young people, doing conscious music, conscious this, conscious that, you know, getting their rapping going. We were turning it out there. We were turning it out there once again, you know. And from there, when they saw what I was doing from there, the manager decided, you know what? We're going to move this guy again, because everywhere we put him, he keeps doing something. Let's move him again. So guess what they did? As soon as I put the studio in there and I got it up and running, they said, Kitwana, we're moving you again. I said, where are you moving me to this time? We're going to move you to a place called Stockwell Youth Centre in Stockwell. Lansdowne Youth Centre in Stockwell. I said, fine, they moved me there. And then at that point now, I'd had enough of the moving stuff. You know, they put other people to manage it, and I had enough of the moving around stuff. But the thing is, it was working with those young people and infusing them with the history and the culture. I was very, very critical. By the time I got to Lansdowne Youth Centre, I was working there. It was a completely different type of project. There were other managers there, so I couldn't just take it off and do what I wanted. And I was the kind of person I like to do what I want to do, because I know why I'm doing what I want to do. So in the end, after a while, it fizzled out. Then I was moved to another youth centre called Marcus Lipton Youth Centre. And at that point, things just fizzled out. At that point, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to do my normal youth work, pool, football, table tennis, whatever they want to do. And then I moved on. I still did a bit of the thing, though, because everybody saw me coming in dressed in my dashikis, like, Kitwana, what you got on there? What's that about? Why are you wearing this? Why are you wearing that? You know, what's that mean? And so I'll still teach them and tell them, but it wasn't as it was before. So, like,
Okay.
I had the mission, I did Pyramid Youth Project, and at that point, it was time to move. It was time to move on. But even now, if I speak to them, they'll look at, oh, that's Kitwana. He always wears the shikis. He always wears this. He always wears that when he's coming to work. That's how he dresses. This African guy.
So yes, cool. So how you became an author? What drew you to becoming an author? Is it the love, or to document what the history for our children? What drew you to becoming an author?
Well, what happened was, I had all of these history books, which I collected. I was studying history and still learning and studying history. And I remember been a while, at least 15, 20 years ago, Nefer, he came over, he was doing a lecture in the UK, and he was speaking to me. He said, "You got to write a history book. You must write a history book." But I'm never a great writer of books. It wasn't really my thing. But I was an artist and I was a designer. And I began to try to find ways of putting history down in a book format. And then my fiance one day said to me, why don't you do a coloring book for boys? Because what we found was that the resources for young boys, because at that time I was living in Ipswich, I moved to Ipswich at that time, but we found that the resource for young boys at school was limited. History resource was limited for young black boys. So that's when I come with the idea of doing this history book. So I did the history book for boys, first and foremost.
What's the name of the book, sorry?
It's called Black History Coloring Book for Boys.
Can you show it to us? You have any copy ready to show us the cover?
Yeah. So that's the first one I did.
Okay.
All right.
Lovely. Okay, cool.
Let me show you some of the. So I started doing history book, for boys and so on and so on.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Different pages like that. And
yes.
Have different people in that.
Yes.
That's Jomo Kenyatta as an example.
Yes.
And then this is our timeline of history. And
yes.
And I also put positive imagery of black families and stuff like that in there.
Yes.
So on, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So because I was an artist, I could do that. So I said, let me start off like this before I actually write a history book. But the idea of here, what really, and this by the way is for our children 6 to 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I did that is because I realized that, and this is not no earth-shattering thingy book, because it's standard. When you get our children early, right, you start teaching children from very early their history and their culture. The chances of them having a respect for that history and that culture is much greater than if you try to get them when they're 15, 16. 100%. By that time they've already gone.
It's like a tree that you cannot bend the branch because the branch is too old now.
It's old now. You can't bend it anymore. So I thought, and then when my son spoke to me about when he was listening to the reggae, the music he was playing, he said, "But Tef, from the time you taught me that, from the time I was being a baby, right?" So I thought, capture them very early. Once you capture them very early, right, and you get them into that history and culture very early, they won't forget it. And this book, by the way, is designed for parents to work with their children on it. Mm-hmm. I tested out. I used to do sessions at a place in Ipswich called A Cycle, lovely little project, working with our young children. And I tested the book out there for them. I brought them pages of the book for them to see how they tested the book. They colored the book in, they did the research and so on with the workers. So it's a book that engages both the young child and the parent, right, in a level of history that most of the history, what I do when I'm researching it, I try to find figures that we don't popularly know about. So there's no Malcolm X in here or Martin Luther King, because we get that all the time. We get that from here. But what you will find in here is Chevalier de Saint George. Who is Chevalier de Saint George?
Yeah, who is that person?
Right? Yeah. Chevalier de Saint George was a black swordsman who lived in France for a while. Very few people know about him, right? Then I've got in here in stuff on Alessandro de Medici. Who was Alessandro de Medici? If you look at it now, Alexander was a member of the aristocracy in Italy, but he was a black person. You see, so a lot of the images I've chosen is stuff that people.
Medici family was black.
Alexander de Medici was a black person.
Oh, okay, cool.
Right, Alexander de Medici was a black person, but you have to. And I tell you what's interesting about that. When I was doing years before I wrote the book, this is interesting. Years before I wrote, I designed this book. I was heavily into history, so like I said, buying books and researching and so on. So one day, I found out that Queen Charlotte Sophia was supposed to be a black woman. But every time you go to the internet, you research it, you find this white woman. I'm thinking, reason right. Then I found out the German embassy had the original painting of Charlotte Sophia in their embassy. So I thought, So I got I called the German embassy and they allowed me in to watch the painting. If you see the painting of this woman, it was painted by a man called Alan Ramsey. Alan Ramsey painted what he saw in the 1700s. He painted this black woman. Now you could say today, if you look at her today, if you compare her today, you could call her she was very light skinned.
A mulatto.
Yeah, you could call her that if you like. She wasn't as dark as you and me.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, mulatto.
So
mulatto.
when I found the image, the image in the German embassy, I said, "What?" So I photographed it, kept a picture of it. Fortunately, I don't know why I've done it. Unfortunately, I don't know why I've done that picture now, but it's in the German embassy. I tried to get in there 5 years ago, and they wouldn't let me in anymore to come and see the picture. But I know it's there, right? So when I began to find out about that, so I've got a history book for girls as well. That's in there, but so you have to know what you're looking for when you're researching, right? When I went to, how did I find out about Alexander de Medici? It was talked about, but I never actually seen it. So I went to the Italian embassy. Who tell me, can I speak Italian? Not a smidgen of it. So I went to the Italian embassy and I told them what I'm looking for. They said, "Oh, there's a library over there. Go over there and have a look." I stood up in the library and I'm thinking, how am I going to find this thing? Everything's in Italian. What am I going to do? It just so happens, as I walked in, there's a particular book I saw on the shelf, picked out the book. Guess what? It was in English. And it was called Life in Florence, something of that nature. And it just so happened when I opened up the book, guess what? Alessandro de Medici's pictures are looking at me in that book. You see? So I found information, and Queen Charlotte Sophia was the wife of, I think it was King George. No, was it King George? Might have been King George. But she's the great-great-grandmother of the queen that passed here recently.
Yeah, I think Queen George, yes.
That's right. And then now, there was another queen called Queen Philippa. How did I find out about her? Now, that's not me discovering for the first time. People knew about Queen Philippa. But what they do, whenever they show you pictures of these people, they show you them as white. Because there's an artist called Gainsborough who painted pictures of Charlotte Sophia later on in life. And he painted her completely white. So that's what they would do. So one day I went to the National Portrait Gallery in UK. That's I'm studying now, thinking, I saw this book. And it's called the Plantagenets, which at the time you had the Tudors, the Plantagenets, all these names that came in British history. And I picked up the book, opened the book, there's a description of Queen Philippa in the book. If you hear the description of this woman, there's no question that she was a black woman. They described it exactly as she was. But if you see pictures of her now, they show you her as a European. But she was a black woman, right? So that's what fueled what I was doing. And so I decided then to start off my journey as an author. I said, let me get into a coloring book. Based on what my fiance said to me, let me do the coloring book. So I did one for boys, one for girls. All that information is in there. And I focused it around Black Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. That's why I focused it. Because we've got a lot of stuff from America. We'll come to that point in a minute. That's why I focused the book. And what it does, it enables you to study a part of our history that's not well known.
Yes.
Because our history is so vast, right? So when you look at, who would know that there was a Arthur Tull, the former, I think it was a Tottenham footballer, and things of that nature. John Giovacci. John Giovacci was Italian.
I was just giving, that's all right. I was just giving a little rundown how grateful we should be for brothers like you that have taken or devoted your life in helping empower our young people with the knowledge that would give them the metabolism for it to continue years after
so
we have departed from the planet. Yes.
It is so important. It is so important that our young children, that we get them early and that they will become the vanguards tomorrow of this history and culture, because the powers that be are not going to stop coming at us and trying to deny our history. They're not going to stop. So we just have a duty to make sure that they are armed with this information. Once they're armed with it, they then have to take it from there. Because like I said, the powers that be are never going to stop. So the whole part of me doing this book and other things that I will do was to not just for the children, we also help you educate the parent as well. And they work with their children to do this. I already had people who got the book, and they feedback to me that they've been working with their children on the book, and also studying the history, stuff that they never knew before. You see? So there's a lot of our history that, and especially with personalities, people who did a lot of stuff. You have to talk about South America, right? How many people know that there was black? How many people know that one time there was a black Argentinian president at one point? Very few of us know that. Okay, in Brazil and so on and so on. There are people, women and men, who are doing some sterling work. Or a lot of them have passed now. So because of most of the people who are featured in the book, they pass, historically they pass. But we don't know about them, but we want to know about them. We want to know what they did. And that's the purpose of the purpose of what I'm doing. And we'll continue to do.
Now, where can one purchase the book if they need to work with the children and get the knowledge that you have documented for their learning?
Well, the book's available on Amazon. Has the book. Amazon has the book.
And the name of the books, please.
Right. So the volume 1. This one.
Yes. Black History. Yeah, Black History coloring book for boys.
Right. And then volume 2 is this one.
Black History coloring book for girls. Lovely.
But just to say, the boys can use the girls' book as well, because the girls' book features a lot of black women, but boys have to understand that too.
Yes.
Because I want to be very clear that unlike this male chauvinistic society that we're living in, right? That was not Africa. Africa wasn't a male chauvinistic society.
Not at all.
Right?
Not at all.
Traditionally, it wasn't like that at all.
Yes.
We know that women were given the ashe to. If in Egypt, if you became a king, as you would notice yourself, if a woman led the community like Queen Hatshepsut,
yes,
right, then she was considered a king.
Yes.
So we know the king and the queen at that time didn't mean male or female. It's like that now.
Yes.
But if you were a woman leading in Egypt, you were a so-called pharaoh. I say so-called, and I'll explain why in a minute. But if you were leading the nation like Queen Hatshepsut, for example, she has a temple and all of that, then she was considered a queen, and she wore the false beard and wore the regalia.
Yeah, she had to take on both roles, male and female at the time.
Yes. You
yes.
see? Yes. That's correct. That's correct. So but we know since colonization and all that kind of stuff was taking place, they've taken stuff away from the women. Is mostly male. No, at the time, obviously, we didn't deal with any of that. If you had the ashe, if you had the life force and the ashe in traditional Africa, not just Egypt, in traditional Africa,
yes,
where it applied, then you would be considered a king. And we know we had people who led.
Yes.
See? So there's a lot more of that history and that is interesting. Why
Queen T was quite prominent too.
Queen T, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. She was another one.
Yeah.
You see, and there was so many of them. Queen Amesh Nefertari.
Yeah.
There was another queen called Queen. The exact name escapes me at this point. You see, but there were so many of them who contributed hugely that we don't know about. You see, because what the European mind pushes on us is all these pharaoh. But let's correct one thing: the pharaoh, the kings they called pharaoh didn't call themselves pharaohs.
Not at all.
The pharaoh was a house they lived in.
Yes.
You see, they were called Shechems and things like that.
Yeah.
That's right. It would, see. So this another false narrative. Well, the pharaoh is a house that they lived in. They weren't called pharaohs. You see, but we the purpose of what I'm doing, and what I'm doing is not new. I'm just part of a long train of contributing towards the growth and development of our children through what I'm doing, right?
Yes.
And we're going to add to it as time goes by. I think I was saying that the book is available on Amazon.
Yes.
If you're in the US, you go Amazon.com. If you're in the UK, you go Amazon.co.uk. Or people can just email me, and then I can have the book. If you're in the UK, I can have the book sent to them.
On
in the
what email?
US.
Can you tell us the email, please? Email?
Yeah. So let me. So do you want me to? Do I have to type it in, or you just give it to you?
You can give. You can just say it and you can type it in after. You can type
Oh,
it
okay.
in.
So if
You can
people
type it in.
email me at Nafaunkh, meaning Nafaunkh .tch@gmail.com, then I can book somebody order and I can have it sent to them. If they're in America, then obviously they'll have to order it online. If they're in the Caribbean, then they can order it on using the American the American link. There's different links depending on how you want to order the book. In the UK, I can always send it to somebody because I have my links over there. Once they order it from me, I can have it sent to them wherever they live in the UK. That's easy enough. Right?
Okay, yeah.
So it's on base. And if they're searching on Amazon for the book, what they have to use, I put my first name in, Nafaunkh. Put the first name in, and then the book will come up.
Okay.
You put black coloring book, loads of them comes up.
Yes, Nafaunkh, yes.
If you put my first name in it, once you put that up, the books will then come up. You see?
Yes. So brother, it looked like I will have to bring you on again the next time because to me, I am very, very impressed. Like many of us should be, and we would like the public to support or the world to support what you're doing and really reward you by supporting what you have done for the young people in the UK today. Because of you, we have many young people that have good standing because of your passion and your dedication and your relentlessness for them to become something because of your passion to see us right as a people. So if you have any last thing to tell our people, what would it be?
I would say that we cannot and should not underestimate the system, as it were, that's working against us, right? Because their interest is in keeping us down. We don't have to worry about any of that, right? Or we'll keep it in mind, but don't worry about it. What we need to do, arm ourselves with our history and our culture, and we didn't even get the spirituality part, which is very, very important. We don't for children, young children, we don't give them all the spiritual stuff. The parent has to live the example. Once the children see it, they'll follow it. Right? They'll see it, they'll grow up following. What we have to ensure is that if we do not take care of our history with our children, then history will repeat itself. The history that we don't want to go through again will repeat itself. The slave trade, in my view, was not a slave trade. Trade, by its very nature, is a respectable form of business. I give you give back to me, we trade. What happened to us was not a trade. The word slave usually refers to someone who, say you have a Jones for sweets or something, and you have to have it. That means you're a slave to the sweets. That's not what happened to us. If I come and I capture you and I put you in a chain, I put you in a boat, and I take you somewhere for the next 200 years, you're a prisoner. You're not a slave.
Kidnapping.
Yeah. You see? And funny enough, when I made that comment at my youth project, young man comes up to me and says to me, I feel so much better now you said that. Because at the time I thought, anytime you mention slavery, young people put their head down like that. They don't want to know. They're just like, oh my gosh, not that again, not that again. If you explain to them like that, then they put their head up and realize we're not slaves. And slavery is a stain on the European man's historical record. We didn't put ourselves through it. So it's not a stain on our record. It's still on his. He has to come to terms with that. In the meantime, we have to work with our children. And giving out history at a very early age will give you a good start.
Wow, I like the way you ended your last advice to the community, because you're right. It's not a trade. A trade,
not a trade at all,
is something
business.
Yes, but if people have to fight and work hard, be tormented, be tortured against their will, it's not a trade, it's a kidnapping.
That's correct. That's right.
So, Nafaunkh, It was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for educating the community. I would like you back here again next time to talk about spirituality, because I know you're a spiritual person, a spiritual man.
Mhm.
And for you to tell me, for us to discuss it, because I think it's in these times we're in today, it's very, very, very important. So important that we discuss and we stay on the spiritual path. Because when you look at what's happening out there, something is
Mhm.
happening. Something to
Absolutely.
nature is taken back. I think we need to discuss it. So thank you again. And I must give you a round of applause because very happy.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
Yes.
Good to be here. And when you want me back, just let me know.
Thank you very much and peace.
You too. Take care, brother Yashmal. Thank you for
Okay,
having
bye.
me.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, bye. Yeah, bye. Cool.